I haven't heard of Moscow announcing nuclear tests. And to say that Washington and Moscow did so simultaneously is probably not entirely accurate. We still haven't received clarification from our American colleagues, as I mentioned in a recent interview with Russian media, about what President Trump actually meant. Whether these are nuclear tests or carrier tests, or so-called subcritical tests that don't involve a nuclear reaction, which are permitted under the draft treaty, or rather, the Mutual Test Ban Treaty, there's still no answer. And we've been talking about this for a long time, proposing the removal of all nuclear weapons from the territories of the countries to which they belong. And all of this fell on deaf ears. Now, Belarus received nuclear weapons from Russia. Well, then we'll deploy them somewhere else. We know that corresponding contacts are underway with South Korea and Japan. This is well known, and these are very dangerous games. Therefore, returning to the question, we did not announce that we were conducting nuclear tests. Our fundamental position was outlined by Vladimir Putin 2 years ago, in 2023, when, answering a question on the matter during one of his speeches, he said that if any of the nuclear powers tested a nuclear weapon, not a carrier, not a subcritical test, but a nuclear weapon test, Russia would do the same.
The fact that Moscow and Washington announced their intention to conduct nuclear tests at practically the same time suggests an undermining of stability on the global stage, or is it, on the contrary, a demonstration of equal opportunities, and thus the preservation of a kind of parity? Thank you.
Frankly, I haven't heard of Moscow announcing nuclear tests. And to say that Washington and Moscow did so simultaneously is probably not entirely accurate. We still haven't received clarification from our American colleagues, as I mentioned in a recent interview with Russian media, about what President Trump actually meant. Whether these are nuclear tests or carrier tests, or so-called subcritical tests that don't involve a nuclear reaction, which are permitted under the draft treaty, or rather, the Mutual Test Ban Treaty, there's still no answer. Just yesterday, there was a meeting, another meeting of the Preparatory Commission for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And at it, the representative of the United States also didn't give an answer, although it would seem, as they say, God himself ordered, at such a forum, to clarify what the President of the United States meant. And you know what else I noticed? The U.S. administration is still being formed, many second and third level positions. And first of all, the Pentagon is being filled. And, in particular, Mr. Robert Kodlik has been nominated for the post of Assistant Secretary of War, as the head of the Pentagon is now called, for nuclear deterrence and chemical and biological defense programs. And he spoke in Congress a few days ago, I think last week. And naturally, he was grilled on the topic of nuclear testing and the current administration's approach to nuclear weapons in general. He said that Trump's decision, and I quote, to resume nuclear testing was dictated by geopolitical considerations. There is still no technical need for them. That's a very strong statement. I don't know to what extent the author I just quoted understands the gravity of what he said, but we should obviously take it in the light of the fact that, as we said, there is no technical need for this kind of testing. And then he completed the thought for us, saying that the goal, in fact, is geopolitical. And what could be a geopolitical goal for the United States? Dominance. And if nuclear weapons are used for this purpose, that's alarming. This is a significant departure from the concept, which Reagan and Gorbachev endorsed, that a nuclear war cannot be won and therefore should never be unleashed. And then there's Mr. Kodlik, who's running for Assistant Secretary of Defense, who stated that nuclear options for responding to certain potential regional conflicts should be developed. That's also an interesting statement. It's a direct indication that this gentleman will think in the spirit of threats as Assistant Secretary of Defense, the nuclear use of nuclear weapons to achieve the solutions the United States needs in a given region. And he also demonstrated many other marvels of double standards when he said that NATO's nuclear deterrence strategy could be changed due to the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. And the fact that this was done after many decades of so-called joint nuclear missions, when U.S. nuclear weapons, U.S. tactical nuclear weapons, have long been deployed in 5 NATO member countries. And we've been talking about this for a long time, proposing the removal of all nuclear weapons from the territories of the countries to which they belong. And all of this fell on deaf ears. Now, Belarus received nuclear weapons from Russia. Well, then we'll deploy them somewhere else. We know that corresponding contacts are underway with South Korea and Japan. This is well known, and these are very dangerous games. Therefore, returning to the question, we did not announce that we were conducting nuclear tests. At the well-known meeting of the permanent members of the Security Council, the President drew attention to President Trump's statement, who said that Russia has been doing this for a long time, China has been doing this for a long time, so we should do the same. And as you know, we immediately contacted our colleagues and explained to them that there must be some misunderstanding here. Well, we are waiting for clarification that what the President received was not to conduct nuclear tests or even prepare for them. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our other agencies, the military, and the intelligence services have been instructed to analyze the situation and come to a consensus on the extent to which this situation requires consideration of the resumption of nuclear testing. Our fundamental position was outlined by Vladimir Putin 2 years ago, in 2023, when, answering a question on the matter during one of his speeches, he said that if any of the nuclear powers tested a nuclear weapon, not a carrier, not a subcritical test, but a nuclear weapon test, Russia would do the same. Next question, please. Artie. Mr. Minister, another article was recently published in which the author and his, supposed sources claim that the U.S. and Marco Rubio were shocked by your intransigence. Were you truly, strict with the Americans, or is this just another article where you overdid it with your sources? Well, you know, we are, in principle, polite people and we try to maintain this trait. It's our quality. I've already had the opportunity to answer similar questions in a number of interviews. And I'd like, given the professional audience of journalists, to draw attention to the latest instances of unprofessional and, I would say, downright harmful coverage of certain events by the media, including, perhaps, especially the British media. What's happening with the BBC right now is well known. The fact that some figures are trying to justify what happened and talking about some kind of orchestrated campaign is disgraceful. I'd also like to draw attention to the Financial Times publication, which some time ago reported that Trump and Putin agreed to meet in Budapest. Lavrov and Rubio were tasked with preparing the meeting. Lavrov and Rubio spoke on the phone. And before that, the Russians sent a harsh memorandum, upon receiving which, it seems, the Americans decided that talking to us was futile and pointless. There are many lies here, including in terms of the sequence of events. The memorandum mentioned by the Financial Times journalists is a non-paper, a so-called non-paper. It's a completely unofficial draft that was sent to our colleagues not after Putin's conversation with Trump, but several days before. The purpose of this memorandum was to remind our American colleagues of what was discussed in Anchorage and what understandings, or so we thought, and the Americans didn't deny, were reached during the meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States. This unofficial document contained nothing other than what was discussed in Anchorage, which didn't cause any rejection among the American interlocutors. The president's telephone conversation took place after this material was presented to the State Department and the National Security Council. And during that conversation, President Trump didn't say a word about the provocative, subversive document you slipped us. It destroys everything, all hopes for a settlement. Absolutely not. They spoke normally. And when President Trump proposed a meeting in Budapest, President Putin responded positively and suggested tasking the foreign affairs agencies with preparing for the meeting, which is what we plan to do. Yes, President Trump said that Marco Rubio would call me back, and maybe he's already calling you. He called Lavrov 3 days later. We had a good, polite conversation, without any disruptions, and basically confirmed moving forward based on the Anchorage understandings, and that's where we parted ways. The next step was supposed to be a meeting of representatives of the foreign affairs agencies, the military, as I understand it, and, probably, the intelligence agencies. But no such further action came from the Americans, and it was from them that we were expecting the initiative to set a specific location and time for such a preparatory meeting, since they had proposed preparing for the summit. Instead, they issued a public statement that there was no point in meeting. By the way, when Marco Rubio publicly commented on our phone conversation, he didn't say that he noticed any escalation or that this escalation was undermining our chances. Not at all. Look at the quote, if I remember correctly. He said that it was a constructive conversation. And it quite clearly showed where we stand, so there's no need for a meeting. Well, this can be interpreted in different ways, but that's exactly what he said. So, as they say, there's a joke. Our conscience is clear, we rarely use it, but in this particular case, it's absolutely true.